Now you might be wondering, am I just some tourist here to bash Wuthering waves? I mean, if you look through my channel, it's basically a museum of Genshin gameplay with some black beacon on the side and soundtrack appreciation. But no, buddy, I've been playing Wuthering Waves since launch day 1. I've survived the bugs, the lag spikes, the hourly download patches that show up like a bubblegum. So yes, I am absolutely a filthy tourist. So welcome to this gotcha hellhole, where I deliver a review produced by two brain cells desperately trying to form a coherent thought through my bare minimum reading comprehension. Let's get started. So first things first, everything you're about to hear is based on my own perspective and experience. You're totally free to disagree, so let's just keep it civil, alright? Good. And also, this review might be kind of late because I got distracted, so it is expected that by the time I'm finished with this video, version 3.0 in Wuthering Waves might have been already released, so my apologies for that. After experiencing the entire storyline of Rinasita, I say this with confidence that it is a massive improvement compared to Jijo, which somehow I can barely remember anything due to how rushed the story went, except for this final boss battle and Abby's appearance. But to their credit, Jinxi's story at version 1.1 was good, and I still fondly remember it being one of the best moments in version 1.x patches. At first impression, the Christianity motifs in RAGUNNA was immaculate. I was very much rocking the vibes they presented, both in the environment and in the story. It is quite prevalent that it would have Christianity themes, the exploration of blind faith, the questionable degrees, and its criticism surrounding it. I was pretty ecstatic about the thematic direction they went in, and in part, I simply love stories that explore Christian motifs in general. I loved RAGUNNA because of this, since they handled it quite well. Compared to the Jinjo cast, the characters in RAGUNNA are pretty well connected. There was one time that I noticed during my rewatch that Brant was actually sent by Carlotta to escort Rover to RAGUNNA, which made me mad at myself because why didn't I notice it in my first playthrough? Version 2.0 did really well at establishing RAGUNNA and its culture. The storyline/arc covered in this version felt pretty complete. It introduced RAGUNNA's characters and motives, presented the conflicts Rover and the others face, built up to the confrontation as they prepared for the carnival, reached a climax with their battle against Rolova, and concluded with a resolution which they defeat Hecate. And of course, there was the teaser for quote-unquote sequel as Rover meets the mysterious girl and the Sentinel's Resonator's true nature is called into question. All in all, I was pretty curious about what's in store for the future, considering the pacing they chose for the story. The main highlight for me in this version was Carlotta, who is advertised pretty hard as the main focus in this patch, which I have to admit, worked on me. However, despite the obvious waifu bait that surrounds her, I found her character pretty fascinating. Heck, when we met her, she has that certain charisma that was unlike from the rest of Rinasita. Or perhaps it was thanks to the fantastic performance by Jennifer English that helps my fascination towards her. I like what they did with Carlotta and the dynamic she had with Rover. To be honest, I'm a big shipper of Shorekeeper and Rover, and Carlotta adds to my list of Rover ships that are actually pretty convincing for Rover as a character rather than feeling like a forced and blatant waifu bait for self-inserts. Aside from that, when it was revealed that Cristoforo was the true mastermind behind the scene, during his usual evil ramblings, there was a part of it that caught my attention, which was most likely his main motivation, not as an antagonist in Rinasita, but for himself.
Remain courageous amidst absurdity. to pursue a spark of divine grace. This, to me, is the truest essence of humanity. Don't you think? Even the most pristine cadence of death pales beside the untamed, fervent, and tenacious spirits of the living. In their journey, they resolutely overcome all obstacles. They pursue, they tear, they burn, simply because they desire to.
Which is quite curious because he sounds like he's describing a Thermodian, but in verse, considering what they're made of. So it makes me wonder if his entire motivation was to see if it was possible to birth a tacit discord born from humanity's resilience as they experience and overcome it. Or he's just a metaphoric embodiment of an author who gets off from the suffering of his characters using his resonance ability. However, despite my compliments in version 2.0, its following patch was flat. To be honest, as version 2.1 update rolls in, I was expecting more. Since this is the patch where they release Phoebe and Brent, I was expecting more story focus on this too, but instead it's just a fishing event for Phoebe, and Brent has a barely minimum screen time to it. Well, to be fair, Brent does have a character story quest, but in my opinion, they really did Phoebe dirty here. Aside from the fishing story event, which I can barely remember other than that it focused on the mess made by the Cetus, the Tidebreaker, the writers seriously underutilized her. I really thought that the way she was set up in version 2.0, where she was questioning her fate and the sentinel that the Order worships, would lead to a meaningful character development, especially since this is her release patch. But they didn't. I mourn how underutilized these two characters were. They could have been great subjects for deeper character analysis, because characters who challenge their own beliefs always go hard. And Brent, with his trope of fools, I really thought they would expand on its lore and give it more proper focus. But they didn't. Instead, we move on to the continuation of the story, leaving them behind because for a narrative perspective, their purpose has already been fulfilled. Anyways, in the next patch, version 2.2, the story shifts its focus to exploring the Sentinel Imperator and the Thermodian Leviathan as well as their Resonator. From a writing perspective, this patch was peak cinema. Here, we properly meet Cartithia in her physical form, the mysterious girl shown at the end of version 2.0. The thematic direction is clearly centered on defying fate, and this is especially prominent in Cartithia's story. She is revealed to be the resonator of both Sentinel Imperator and the Thermodian Leviathan during the period where they were fused together. We get to spend time with her, and even though I rolled my eyes at all the shit teasing between her and the rower, their scenes were admittedly sincere and heartwarming. This scene in particular was my favorite moment between the two of them.
No, I'm sure they can feel what's in your heart. I'm not just saying that to comfort you. I believe it's possible. I once saw two friends, one who was already dead, reconcile with each other from within a Sonaro sphere. When frequencies are concentrated in one place, it's possible that their reverberations could still carry traces of human will.
Meaning?
They might still be able to hear and feel. Your voice, your goodbyes, your feelings could have reached them. After all, these frequencies are strong enough to manifest in the real world.
Really?
They haven't made a move against us. They must still remember you, which means they can probably hear you too.
I'm glad.
The flow of this dialogue and the camera framing to emphasize the emotion and conviction was so good. However, as much as I like Cartithia, her so-called death, or rather how it was handled, felt kind of cheap to me. I understand from a thematic perspective that in order to be reborn, one has to die. But the way it was built up felt like low-key bait aimed at the players. I also have to admit that this type of storytelling isn't really my cup of tea, since I, as the player, don't have a parasocial attachment to her and simply like her as a character. Those scenes, while competently executed, ultimately felt a bit to me. As for Cantarella, well, she's a different story. Cantarella is exactly the type of character I love in any piece of fiction, a walking contradiction. Before we met her, Siakona provides anecdotes and hearsay about the cruel and sinister matriarch of Basilia, emphasizing that no one has seen her in a long time. Yet, when we finally met her, her polite, ever-smiling demeanor both reinforce and complicate those rumors. The way she is presented to the audience, and by extension, how Rover perceives her, makes her seem like someone who is simultaneously well-mannered and deeply manipulative. But no, as revealed in the main story, she's actually what you call the MVP. The hidden savior of Cartithia, heck, even the overarching story of Rinasita. Even though her character design is, well, not my type, seeing those moves of hers juggle while she was simply walking always threw me off guard. Her symbolism with jellyfish fit her so well. Therefore, Cantarella is the main highlight for me in version 2.2. To be honest, this entire patch is actually pretty good. Even better than version 2.0 story due to how it was more character-driven than plot-driven. After this straight up fire patch, then comes the anniversary update in the next. I won't cover the mess that the anniversary update came with it. However, there is one thing I want to address in this patch, or rather, in the version 2.x run. What is up with the weird story update lately? Even though in this patch we receive a character story quest with Zani to showcase her badassery, along with a barely disguised main story quest masked as an event story, the way they've handled the release of the main story quest ever since has left me confused. I mostly shrugged it off because, if that's the direction I want to go, then sure, I guess. However, I have to admit that this every other patch story release quest hurts the pacing of the narrative, or at least from my perspective. Anyways, Zani. One word? Queen. My main highlight of this patch. Zani's character story quest was simple, but effective in exploring her character. Not only that, we got this badass fight and cutscene. But the most important, how she's presented? No romance or ship undertones with her to Rover. Thank the gotcha gods. That's why she's the queen. Peak character design too. My other main highlight of this patch is your Summer Will Never Wither event, which, to be honest, felt both like a Siakona character story quest due to its strong focus on her backstory, and a main story quest given how it delves into the Order's corruption. I had loads of fun with this event. The reason it caught my attention and became my main highlight is how thematically connected it is to the main story. While the main narrative tackles defying fate, the Order's rose-colored faith, and individual resilience, this event adds another layer on top of that, recognizing truth beneath falsehood. And I think they handled this aspect really well. And while they've continued releasing banger after banger of in-game cutscenes even beyond this patch, this particular frame takes the crown as my favorite. And now with that fantastic and heartfelt event, surely they won't shift the Christianity motives established in the beginning into something else, right? Right? What? I mean, sure, Septimont has been mentioned here and there, but what? To be honest, I was more concerned than hyped when they released the trailer and character teasers. This imposing baddie especially caught my attention, and somehow there was also a random Jinjo man among them, which left me wondering what was even going on. My initial reaction was confusion and concern about the story's direction going forward, but I was still willing to see what they could deliver. So I sat back, relaxed, and let the story flow as I experienced it. It was okay. I mean, I'm concerned, but it was okay. But still, I'm worried. Maybe it was just a me thing, cause while I still see it as okay, I did not enjoy Septimont to the point that I didn't explore the map and events in this patch. All I did was the main quest and then dip out, only occasionally doing some daily quests. That's it. I'm starting to get sad at the story direction from here. While it still has some connection to RAGUNNA using Cortitia by proxy, but it's just, I don't like how self-contained this patch felt. Despite that, this patch does ignite some light, with Lupa being the main highlight for me. I have to admit, I wasn't exactly fond of Lupa, and I didn't really like her character design when I first experienced the story during its patch release. At that time, I was too busy being confused about the story's direction. However, on my rewatch, I realized that she's actually a good character that the story failed to utilize beyond her introductory patch. What a waste of a cool character.
First time.
And also, do you remember how RAGUNNA has a weird main story quest release by speaking a patch, then continuing it in the next one? Well, Septimont has its version. This time, it's time-gated tied to the second half banner release. I remember being confused when my friend who also played this game pinging me that the boss fight in the story was cool, and I was like, boss fight? I didn't encounter any boss when I did the story quest, and then he said there's a continuation. So I went back to the game, and indeed there was an hour and a half worth of story content still in it. And yeah, Scar is back, I guess. At this point, I didn't know how to feel about this. The last time the story left off, it ended on a cliffhanger in the first half. Are you saying the continuation was in the same patch, not the next one? I was not amused by this, or maybe I was just stressed because if I remember correctly, this patch was released almost at the same time as Honkai Star Rail version 3.4, which dropped a major plot twist that nearly made me crash out. And then I experienced this bullshit in Wuthering Waves, which almost pushed me over the edge. So yeah. Two different types of almost crash out I experience as a person who rarely crashes out. Not recommended. Anyways, moving on. Version 2.5, also known as the Prolova patch. 2 words, peak cinema. Prolova was a fresh of breath air. In these major patches of Rover getting glazed by characters and getting romantic undertones by them, she is a major hater of Rover due to their past together. Finally, another type of character relationship dynamic with Rover. Aside from that, how her backstory was revealed and shows how it influenced her current motives.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
This patch was all around peak. Maybe except for Fenrico's conclusion, which was rebuilt with lack of build-up because the previous patch was too self-contained on Septimont to focus on his eventual downfall, and somehow he was redeemed? What the heck? I remember sighing in relief in this patch, thinking there are no more story quests for now, and maybe, just maybe, I can finally start exploring Septimont. Until my friend sent this screenshot a few weeks later.
You can't keep getting away with it!
The second half of the main story quest in this patch was short, focusing on Augusta and her past, of how she rose to become the F4 told by an NPC with sick design through this scourge, which was personally a unique experience. And a scene between the priestess who first appeared in the previous patch, and Augusta as they banter and discuss a plan they made a long time ago. And then comes the version 2.6, Prison. This patch is a goddamn prison. I'm in a self-contained story prison of hell. At this point, I was done. Why am I here? What's the point of being in here? Why is the story getting distracted? I mean, thematically, Septimont arc is still tied to the overall story motifs of Rinasita, unity, and individuality. However, despite that, Septimont feels distant to autonomous from the motifs at the same time. Seriously, I don't know what's going on with the writers when it comes to Septimont. I'm fine with the waifu bait, and as long as it's cohesive within the story, like what they did in RAGUNNA. However, they really overdid it here to the point that the second half of Rinasita's storyline almost loses sight of why Rover was there in the first place. Almost, because Rover does get what they wanted in the end, but even that feels like a footnote. Do not get me started with all the Uni arc in the second half of the patch. That pissed me off. However, despite being pissed off at almost everything in this patch, it did give me some insight on a few things. Rover's tendency to self-sacrifice and not wanting others to sacrifice themselves, and some crumbs of world building. Honestly, I'm a bit hesitant to say Rover's tendency as characterization. This might just be a fuel for self-insert and parasocial romance themes, as they tend to get romance undertones with female characters with self-sacrifice themes, but this does hint of Rover's former identity before they rove Solaris 3. It's effective for making me curious. For the world building part, here's what caught my attention. Chaos. Chaos, according to the loading screen, is described as a shifting realm between life and death. It is not a physical realm, but a convergence of infinite possibilities. I found this interesting because, Limbo exists in Wuthering Waves. However, I do hope this isn't just a one-time thing exclusive to Yuno and Rinasita, but an actual part of world building to the overall lore in this game. Anyways, aside from the hindsight and lots of gripes I have with this patch, I do have a highlight character. Can you guess who it was? It's Avidius. Despite the game's advertisement to show their banner characters in this patch, and in the story to the point of almost pissing me off, it was Avidius, an NPC who only caught my attention. Just like Cantarella, he fits the bill of the character I love in every fiction. The contradiction of his ambition for power, but still cares ultimately for Septimont, which will always be a good character in my eyes. And the revelation of his true identity after this patch further cements my love for him as my only favorite character in Septimont. After this mess of a patch, we go to the next, the finale of Rinasita storyline. Due to the mess of Septimont arc, I really thought I was done with everything in Rinasita. But when the story went back to RAGUNNA, it instantly revived my interest. This was the point that I realized how much I missed RAGUNNA and its Christianity themes. Thank goodness I'm finally back. As I sat back and played through this 7-hour story from start to finish, I was surprised. It was still fairly decent. I was expecting a mess. This patch could have been excellent, if not for the self-contained nature of Septimont. The finale, riddled with a lack of build-up, caused everything to escalate far too quickly, and ultimately relied on convenient as-pulls for its resolutions. What really carries this patch is the cinematic presentation, and goddamn, they were good at it. It's just a shame that Wuthering Waves has some of the best cinematography out there, yet the writing doesn't do it justice. I could have said all my criticism when I went through Septimont arc patches. However, due to how prevalent it was, I decided to make a separate segment in this video because, oh boy, I just want to talk about it. Septimont on its own is fine. I'd even say it's good. However, its placement within the main story feels completely out of place, resulting in a strange, self-contained arc that has almost nothing to do with the larger narrative. Instead, it ends up stalling the story, making it feel like its primary purpose is to promote these shiny new characters to players. The entire Septimont arc should have been a voiced world quest series, or they could make a new story structure, an interlude quest or whatever, to introduce this city-state. But instead, they shoehorned this waifu to week structure in every Septimont patches instead of spending their time to cook the main story. However, if they are insistent in placing Septimont arc in the main story, they should have handled it better. The core thematic focus of Rinasita storyline is unity, humanity's resilience, individualism, and self-actualization of identity. Both RAGUNNA and Septimont arcs technically fulfill these thematic beats in their own ways. However, taken together as a cohesive whole, they contribute virtually nothing, except in the finale. The problem of Septimont lies in the lack of connection, or to be specific, not utilizing the connection they have outside. Right off the bat, as Rover arrived in Septimont to look for Cartetia, if you interact with the NPCs, they say this.
Most Ragunnese we see here are from the Troop of Fools or the Montelli Nobles. They're a bit more open to our ways of thinking about faith.
The Montellis and the Troop of Fools? If only Septimont weren't so autonomous and had used this element to build up the main story, it could have been genuinely interesting, given their thematic parallels around self-actualization. But that's only a minor offense. As I rewatched the main story for this review, I noticed a far more egregious missed opportunity. One the writers could have used to connect RAGUNNA and Septimont in a natural, meaningful way.
Fate unveils itself to the priestess. Following its guidance, she reaches the end again and again, foreseeing its conclusion. Heads fall, whimpers fade. She sees no hero of heroes. Variables added, visions expanded. She sees no hero of heroes. Beyond a doubt, no other choice. She sees no hero of heroes. The priestess is never wrong, but she despises her own truth. For her success is Septimont's defeat. Why? Defeat. Is it always defeat?
If fate one day wills our annihilation, if we are nothing more than fate's puppets,
when that time comes, what good is a priestess? Septimont will be no more. Nothing will remain. Only she who foresaw every death still lives.
This is why I was so pissed off at the second half of the main story in version 2.6. I was genuinely flabbergasted that the writers glossed over this and failed to take advantage of it. You know, could have been the crux of unity and connection between the two Rinasita city-states. The game spends so much time portraying her as a rebellious, defiant character, yet she never goes beyond being an outside factor, aside from sacrificing herself. Why didn't she ask RAGUNNA for help, especially when the Montellis and the troop of fools regularly visit Septimont? If she was truly desperate to save her beloved city-state, why didn't she defy convention and reach out despite the strained relationship between RAGUNNA and Rinasita? I mean, sure, Rover technically fulfills the role of the outside factor, but my god, they're too much of an outsider. The outsider savior trope is one I generally dislike unless it's executed in a genuinely convincing and creative way. But in the end, the writers fumbled Septimont in some of the most frustrating ways, especially considering how much potential it had. Due to the self-contained nature of Septimont, the revelation in the finale felt like Aspul's because there was little to no build-up. Which Aspul's, you say? Well... Yes, it's Galbrena and Chuyen. I have so many conflicting feelings about Galbrena. Believe it or not, she was actually my highlight character in the finale patch, and her dynamic with Rover was genuinely good. As opposed to Rover, who usually does the saving for most characters throughout the Rinasita storyline, this time it was Galbrena who took on the role of the savior in the finale. What part of Galbrena is an Aspul? Well, her entire existence. Because what do you mean she was actually significant to the story, yet only introduced her properly in a freaking finale patch? What do you mean the entire goal of Praxidus hinges on her existence, but they wait until the finale to properly introduce her? And what do you mean her true identity is Angel, Augusta's sister? Galbrena is a cool character. Really, I actually like her. I'm just sad that she ended up being another unfortunate victim of the waifu of the patch structure layered on top of an Aspul. I mean, sure, she has a presence in Augusta's flashback and a teaser appearance in the first half of version 2.6. But what was the point if such an important character is only properly introduced at the tail end of the story, considering Rinasita's entire thematic core? And speaking of another convenient Aspul in the finale,
a dying martyr entrusted it to me.
apparently the reason Chuyen was there was that Scar broke out of prison. And I was like, why is he only appearing now? Scar showed up back in version 2.4. So why the heck is the subplot about chasing a fugitive only freaking introduced in the finale patch? And also, what do you mean he met Fenrico and got that convenient lantern from him so that the story can proceed? I'm sure you can all see the pattern by this point and understand why the second half of the Rinasita storyline falls apart. The writer's decision to make Septimont so autonomous from the rest of the main story nearly breaks its core focus. Forcing story beats and narrative elements that should have been developed in Septimont gets all cramped into the finale. And precisely due to these problems, I wasn't able to fully enjoy this visually impressive cutscene.
Sway you, then we will defeat you together.
The deepest abyss of despair!
People of Rinasita, please hear my call.
my god, I really tried my hardest not to cringe everything that's happening in this cutscene. I really had high expectation for Rinasita's storyline. I remember when I first arrived in RAGUNNA being completely enamored with everything, from the visuals, characters to cinematography. But I ended up disappointed because it felt like they cared more about selling waifus than telling the story they wanted to convey. They had all the tools and pieces to create a great story, but they didn't make use of them. I'm so bummed out at everything that I didn't even do the post-Rinasita quest. I'm just tired of the waifus getting in the way of the story. The question is, will I keep playing this game? Sure I will. But not gonna lie, because of the mess they made of the story, it snuffed out some of the passion I had for it. I'm a big fan of story-driven games, and the reason I was drawn to Wuthering Waves was the post-apocalyptic vibes it gave off. Which is kind of ironic because RAGUNNA has a fewer post-apocalyptic vibes, yet it's the one I like the most. While Septimont, which has those vibes, ended up being my least favorite part of the entire Rinasita storyline. What are my future hopes in this game? Less waifu fanservice and more focus on the story. And maybe some world building and lore? I'm practically begging for it due to the severe lack of it in the game. And also, please, Wuthering Waves, can you give us, the female and rainbow gamers, some male fanservice? Brent and Julian was not enough, and we're dying of thirst here. Thank you for watching, and maybe I'll see you next time in my Honkai Star Rail Emporius storyline review, which is currently a work in progress. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment down what you think. Bye bye!